I think I'll go from here to talking about Pulse, but I want to take a step back for a second. And many of the platforms that people have been talking about, and much of the work that people have been describing, uses when we scale the experiments. Most of the versions of scaling here have been scaling things to web scale experiments, where what you're doing is just taking advantage of the fact that there's not a lot of people in your university subject participant pools or who you directly know. There's a lot of people online. You can contact them and recruit them much more easily and a much greater scale. But for many of the studies that well, I don't know, we tend to design our studies in such a way that it's plausible to do it with an internet-based sample of like mTurk users, for example. But for many of the studies that we and other fields run, it's not plausible to run the study using the mTurk population. So, for example, if you wanted to go recruit people who had very little access to the internet, the mTurk population is a particularly bad sample to be using. You have a hit rate of 0 people that would qualify for your study. So what would you want to do if you wanted to do the kinds of like on the ground studies that right now involve, like many of you have run these, like sending a team of researchers to the Amazon or like to a small town in India to run a study like an abacus training study? Like how would you do that? How would you do a survey of people who maybe have good mobile phone access but don't have don't don't like regularly use the internet or don't want to sit down for your study? So what Pulse and hundreds of other organizations focused on is doing recruitment that's more local, but not local where you are. Pulse has created a platform where they're able to do things like radio advertisements in otherwise hard to reach communities, where what they're offering is not U.S. dollars, but mobile phone credits. So they've been able to do really interesting targeted recruitment of participant populations to understand things like the effects of like war on individual people's attitudes towards things, or like what are the effects of natural disasters on and how can technology assist? Or here's another question, like how do women receive healthcare information and what role does trust play in the high levels of maternity morbidity in Eastern Africa? So they're able to recruit participants for research from uh, various places in Eastern Africa for research. And so I think like if you're interested in, I think it's like another way to think about scaling our experiments. And IST research, they're one good person to talk to if you're interested in maybe trying to do basically a worldwide experiment that isn't well suited for the kinds of participants that are coming to your online experiments by default. And besides IST research, there are many other organizations doing this, though they're usually doing it at a more local level. So that, for example, I as a test, I picked a few cities and asked what would it be like to do targeted recruitment in Johannesburg. And yeah, there are tens of organizations in Johannesburg that are doing participant recruitment. They typically tend to do it for marketing research or other purposes. And there isn't something like IST research that I know of, other than IST research, that's like pooling across many different recruitment avenues, everything from on the ground recruitment to radio advertisements, other sources. But I think it's another interesting direction that we could think of in terms of how we scale cognitive science, so that rather than scaling it by increasing n on the web, we scale it